welcome. Today, we are going to be talking about WIDA and Listenwise, Pairing for Student Success. Your speakers today, great to meet you all. My name is Karis Whitna, and I'm on the Listenwise team. I support all WIDA states and all teachers in WIDA states, and I'll kick it over to our incredible educators who are on with us today.
My name is Crystal Brown. I'm an ESL teacher. This is my 24th year of teaching. I'm teaching high school currently. I've taught middle school, taught some elementary, love teaching ESL, and I'm really enjoying Listenwise.
Hey everyone, my name is Tatiana Mesa. I'm coming out from New Jersey here in the East Coast, Northeast Jersey. I'm an ESL teacher in Hoboken Public Schools. I serve multilingual students in K-5.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Tatiana and Crystal. We're going to go ahead and get started with an icebreaker. And our icebreaker is going to be an introduction to Listenwise. So what we're going to do is we're going to listen to one of our short current event lessons. This lesson is 30 seconds long, and as you listen to this lesson, I want you to think about this thinking job question. If you could make a perfume with the scent of your favorite dish, what dish would you choose? Okay, so that's the question that you're thinking about as we listen to this podcast. Here we go. We got the tech all figured out.
Good morning, I'm Layla Falden. For Valentine's Day, a nice candlelit dinner with your significant other is a sweet gesture, but perhaps a bit predictable. What if you could make them smell like your favorite dish instead? Intrigued? Well, the Idaho Potato Commission may have something for you. It's launching a limited edition scent, a potato perfume designed to smell like a fresh batch of French fries. Nothing quite represents love like fresh made French fries, right?
So today, what we're going to be covering is an introduction to Listenwise. You just got a small taste of what we have. We're going to talk about WIDA and Listenwise alignment, and then we're going to talk through strategies for how to use Listenwise podcast and video lessons to help your students develop academic language, get them talking, and keep them engaged. So, introduction to Listenwise. Here at Listenwise, we're a mission-driven organization that's passionate about providing our educators and our teachers with engaging multimodal lessons for our multilingual learners. We've built a collection of over 3,000 podcast and video-based lessons that are standards aligned for English language arts, English language development, social studies, STEM, and current events. And within those lessons, there's auto-scored quizzes, there's teachers' guides, there's scaffolded supports, there's listening organizers, and comprehension and discussion questions. If you currently are a Listenwise user, would love it if you could put into the chat something that you love about Listenwise. So what our content, it comes from over 60 different podcasting sources. Here are just a few of the different sources that our content comes from. And we recently received an SL Level 4 certificate, which means that we are an evidence-based program. It means that we demonstrate rationale for our use in the classroom. So it's something really exciting and we're proud of, just because we're really committed to providing content to teachers that is research-based and that's going to further develop your students' literacy and language skills. And then we've been a finalist for some other awards too. It's just a little bit about who we are. And then now we'll jump into WIDA and Listenwise alignment. So you might be very familiar with this if you're coming from a WIDA state. Here are WIDA's 4 big ideas that were outlined in the 2020 standards framework. Equity of opportunity and access, integration of content and language, collaboration among stakeholders, and functional approach to language development. What I'll add, as I saw some people coming in, is that you might not actually be joining us from a WIDA state, but I bet that these big ideas probably hold some value and truth for you as an educator. I think that as we look at these values as teachers of multilingual learners, these are things that I can't imagine don't cross state lines. So those are just some of the WIDA big ideas. We'll talk about how Listenwise fits into each one. So let's think about equity of opportunity and access. So from WIDA, the way that they frame it is that we provide access for multilingual learners to rich, standards-based, grade level content, including by scaffolding up. I'm curious to hear from the educators on this call on what kinds of scaffolds help your students access grade level content. So go ahead and type into the chat, what kinds of scaffolds help your students access grade level content? We previously had a webinar with Tan Wei, and he just explained how we approach supports and scaffolds as equity tools. And I love what he has to say. So let's listen to what he has to say. Here we go.
What all the features of what Listenwise is doing as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you notice how we didn't make the content easier. This is the equity part. When we work with multilinguals, oftentimes things get dumbed down for them because, oh, pobrecito, they're just learning English. No, we're going to keep the mountain the same height, but we're going to give them multiple paths to get there. We're going to add different tools to that backpack so they can climb that summit. We're not making the mountain smaller. We're just giving more tools to summit the mountain. And that's what Listenwise and all the strategies that we're doing here makes it accessible. If we ever make things easier for kids, this is a flag for equity. We're saying, do we think that multilingual students can achieve just like everyone else? And I didn't make this really difficult text. I didn't dumb it down. I just made accessing it more accessible.
Beautiful. I couldn't have said it better, so I had to play his words. So here are all of the different scaffolds that are within our platform. And what I love seeing is as I look through the answers that folks have written of the ways that you are already scaffolding, you're seeing the same things that we're doing on the platform. You know, I saw graphic organizers, listening organizers, and you're seeing all of these different ways that at Listenwise, we're thinking about how can we build scaffolds that ensure students are reaching grade level content, that they're reaching that mountaintop, and we're not making the content feel babyish or not relevant to their lives in the process. I think that this question was directed to the hosts and panelists. Isn't simplified comprehension questions making it easier? You know, I do think that's, yeah.
In terms of that, I mean, we have to also take into account the proficiency level that our students have. I mean, we might have to engage in simplified comprehension questions for a newcomer more than we would a student at a level 3 or level 4 who's been with you longer.
Absolutely, I agree. And I also think that you can still reach the comprehension level of the student and allow them to expand their language while giving them a question that they understand. It has to be in a text structure that they can read and comprehend. A lot of times our students don't understand the text that they're reading just because it's written in a certain discourse. It's written in a certain way that's too difficult for them to achieve success. And so not necessarily simplifying the question or what the question is asking, but just the manner in which you ask it.
So let's jump next to integration of content and language. So what do we learn from the WIDA standards framework? We hear that by content language integration, we mean that multilingual learners develop content and language concurrently, with academic content as a context for language learning and language as a means for learning academic content. I'm curious to hear from folks on the call. What is one way that you taught content and language together today? At Listenwise, what we do is we think about designing our lessons to teach content and language together, and you'll see that we always have a content and a language objective that goes with our lessons. We also offer a first, second, and third listen for our English language development lessons. The first lesson is all about teaching language. The second lesson is all about teaching language and content together. And the third lesson is all for content. And we have specific graphic organizers that go with those different first, second, and third lessons. So collaboration, I'm reading the chat and got a little distracted. It's just awesome seeing people be like, oh, I need to get to know you and the work that you're doing. And some collaboration among stakeholders, it feels like the right moment, collaboration among everyone on this call. So, that's another key value and big idea from WIDA. So content and language teachers can work together to plan and deliver grade level standards-based instruction, plan for systematic, explicit, and sustained language development alongside the academic demands of the content areas, support one another, and share unique fields of expertise. With support one another, we do have a co-teaching function on the platform. And once the webinar is all done, you all will get a recording of this, and you'll get a resource that has different web links that I'm going to share. So that one is one of our co-teaching on Listenwise. So just something to note that you'll get this follow-up after the webinar. So here we are, collaboration among stakeholders. I think it's really valuable to hear from our principals how they see collaboration happening with Listenwise. So we're going to turn it over to a principal in Texas, not a WIDA state, but still a really valuable testimonial. All right, here we go.
What I think is most remarkable about Listenwise is that it is a product that can help all students, but it specifically can target and help close gaps for our ELL students, which I've mentioned at the beginning. I can share that when we looked at other programs that could provide supplemental resources and instruction to our ELLs, so much of it was test prep type activities where they get on a computer, they put on headphones, they listen to something being read to them, and then they click, answer some questions, or they record into their speaker their interpretation. And that is great. Our students definitely need practice for TELPAS and end of year assessments. However, I was really looking for something that teachers could use that would lift their lessons in that relevancy category, that might spark an interest in a student's background knowledge or where they come from, that would help them with that real world connection, which it hit all the boxes for that for me. And also to help some of my teachers, I'm on a campus that has 14 brand spanking new teachers across all of our contents. That would help them with some of that literacy instruction that we know our new teachers struggle with, and some of our veteran teachers need a little refresher on every now and then. And so it really does hit that, especially when it comes to vocabulary, being able to make sure that listening and literacy skills and that BDA reading process is carried throughout. And then also just, facilitate that love of learning and deep understanding that our students we know that they have, but really resonating with them and getting their involvement and their choice in the lesson. I could just see this being utilized both as, mini lesson, model lesson, small group, letting students have some free choice. I know we're going to get to the weird news area at some point, but I think there's just a huge amount of possibilities of how to use this on a campus, and it is not limited to just test prep or a workbook. It really allows for collaboration and allows for connection, and it allows for deep and authentic learning.
Awesome. Thanks for listening to that. We're seeing our educators across various WIDA states, across states, using Listenwise collaboratively to work on vocabulary, listening skills for all of their learners. And then we'll cover the last big idea, functional approach to language development. This is really all about teaching how language works. You all are very deeply familiar with this. So here's what WIDA says. You can all look at that. Perfect. And as we are designing our lessons, we're constantly thinking about key language uses and the function of language. And we're building in language objectives that have students will be able to explain, students will be able to argue X, Y, Z. So that is just something that we're constantly thinking about as we're designing lessons, is the function of language. So let's listen to one of our debate stories. are emojis language? Before we listen, I would love for you to put on your student hat, and you're just going to read the transcript from this lesson. Think about, for your student, words that might be new to you and words that you might be unsure of how to pronounce. So I'm going to go ahead and share the transcript. We're not going to read all of it, just a part of it. I think you all are seeing that. And don't worry if you don't get through all of it. I'll give everyone about 1 minute to read this part of the transcript. Great. We'll just stop right there. Wherever you made it is perfect. So now let's jump in and listen to this passage. As we listen to this podcast, midway through, I'm going to show you the interactive transcript, okay? All right, let's jump there.
So you may have heard the thumbs up emoji is dead, as in not cool, don't do it. But hold up, we may be victims of clickbait, intended to stir up dissension between young and old, left and right, after someone dug up an old Reddit thread and presented it as gospel last week. Elder millennial Jonas Downey read one of the articles and decided to see if his 13-year-old daughter's interpretation of certain emojis differed from his.
We sort of take it for granted. Thumbs up means thumbs up. And for me, like the grimacing face just means like, something bad is happening. It's very like straight, the way that I interpret it. And my daughter does not. There's an additional layer of kind of like sarcasm.
His daughter hates the thumbs up, and she thinks the crying, laughing emoji is weak.
I don't know. It doesn't feel as expressive as other things you can use, like the skull face and the actually like sobbing emoji. I feel just have more personality than just like, haha.
So it's been bleached of its impact. So now they need something that has a stronger impact that's more outrageous or more over the top. So yeah, laughing to death, right? That's a great example.
That's Susan Herring. She's a linguistics professor at Indiana University who specializes in digital communication.
I think the battle here is really about the connotations of the emoji, the pragmatic meanings, and those are fluid.
Emojis are a part of modern language, and they can mean many things to many people all at once.
It's characteristic of what young people do with language. They're always generating new expressions and new words and new ways of speaking to distinguish themselves in opposition to other groups that are perceived as being out of it or square, as we used to say back in the day.
Now, a lot of young people online say they aren't that bothered by the thumbs up emoji. They've honestly got bigger concerns, but the conversations sparked by those clickbait articles, like how people understand each other, were real. I mean, we spent some quality time here at Weekend Edition working through this. Does my thumbs up bother you? What about the check mark? Why can't people just use their words? Do you think I'm being passive aggressive when I just say okay? Not when you say okay, but when you say K, that's aggressive. It's not even passive. It was a can of worms for a hot minute. So bottom line, is the thumbs up emoji really dead? Professor Herring says,
that's a question for future linguists.
For now, at least, judging by our Slack messages today, we're keeping it alive. Sincerely, though sometimes sarcastically, which is just the way we like it.
Perfect. So this is one of our English language development lessons. And what we have is a description of what the lesson is all going to be about. We have a video to build background knowledge, and we're specifically picking the videos so they align with key vocabulary that students are going to hear within the podcast. There's always the option to slow it down to 20%. The vision there is to provide just increased access if that might be something that benefits your learner. It doesn't make it sound robotic, so I think that's key to bring out. And then you see that transcript that we've been seeing. There's different assignment resources. This is where you're seeing that screenshot from earlier of the content and language objective, the key concepts we're discussing, and then always we include language listening comprehension questions, discussion themes, and the vocabulary that's going to be within the lesson, and listening organizers. Then we've got a teacher's guide ready to go for you. And then there's always a quiz and then an assignment component right up here. And for our English language development lessons, there's also the option to toggle to Spanish, so students can see the transcript in Spanish. When students see the transcript in Spanish, the words don't light up, but it's there for them, so they hear the audio in English and they have that as a support. And that is really what I wanted to highlight there. What I'm going to show you now, within the ELD Teacher's Guide, you're going to see that we are naming the proficiency level descriptors within the lesson. So you're going to see those are a feature. And then we're also calling out the language for the different areas of standards. So the language for social and instructional language, language for language arts, and language for science. So that's just another way in which we're aligning ourselves to the WIDA framework and the WIDA standards. And within your teacher's guide, there's always going to be something for before listening, during listening, and after listening, and various scaffolds and supports built in throughout. And our lessons are always going to be working to address all domains of literacy. So we have writing built in through the assignments, those discussion questions students are speaking. There's different reading opportunities through the transcripts and extension activities that are built in. So we're just thinking about how can we hit on all domains of literacy, and of course, obviously listening within the lessons. We have quizzes ready to go where students are working on their listening comprehension. So we have a blog out, and that's in one of our resources of ideas of how you can use Listenwise to support with preparation for the access test and that listening component. We are, not a direct test prep material, but it's still something that you can certainly use to support your learners. And you'll see their quiz report. So they have the option to take the quiz both in English and in Spanish for the English language development collection lessons. And let's jump now. I am mindful of time, and I want to ensure that our educators can share what it's like to implement Listenwise and what it looks like in action. So we see people using Listenwise as bell ringers, do nows, whole class and small group instruction, independent work, learning stations, or a combination of the above. I'm going to kick it over to Crystal to share how she uses Listenwise in the classroom.
Okay, so I first heard about Listenwise. I came upon it just when I was looking for something really to help with academic language proficiency, especially on access. I saw my scores and reflecting upon them, just saw not newcomers, but proficient English speakers that had been in the US and in US schools for many years. Their listening scores just dropped. And I know with the pandemic and just all that we've been through with COVID and in school and not in school and hybrid learning and virtual learning, that the listening skills have just deteriorated of our students. Their ability to listen with targeted listening, explicit listening. And so I was looking for rich material with layers that I could use as a springboard, I could use as a backdrop for a lesson or a unit or a project that I wanted to do. I had looked all over YouTube, and most of the material there that's designed for ESL is very basic. Other sources of listening material that I have are very basic, simple sentences, simple sentence structure, and simple content. So as an ESL teacher, I was trained to focus on language development and not necessarily on content. So science and math related stories are my favorite because they're what I feel is my weakness. I'm not a science teacher, I'm not a math teacher, but I do my best to bring science and math into my classroom. And if you think about science and math topics and themes at the high school level, physical science and biology, they're just so complex. So those stories that are related to that and that the kids can connect to the other learning that they're exposed to in the other classrooms really helps. I use it for daily language practice sometimes when I use the weird news stories. My parrots over here were weird news story about parrots in a Texas backyard. And my student from Honduras spoke up and said, "Oh, I know that bird. This is what we call it." And we began a bilingual discussion of what you call a parrot in the different countries. And it was just a fun way to integrate speaking into our lesson. It's beyond the basics. It integrates the content. As I said, we used a lesson story about a team that discovered a planet and a telescope in space, and the discussion of rockets and rocket fuel and the dimensions of the rocket and of the telescope were just amazing ways to integrate science as well, and math. So I found the parrot story and other stories from the Weird News to be really, I went to TESOL, and the way they put it in one of the presentations was to humanize our lessons. We get so busy as teachers to just, the lesson has to be perfect. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Okay, I'm going to use this strategy and I'm going to pull out all my bag of tricks, but we really have to connect with students. And I feel like post-COVID, that's more important than ever, because kids are so disconnected from their education right now. Can you go to the next slide? Mm-hmm. So 3 of my favorite past lessons and strategies that I talked about or used in the classroom were learning about Mexican culture through tacos. Now, I jumped into this because I have a Vietnamese boy who, and this was my upper level advanced group. The Vietnamese boy, he thinks so deeply. I can't even wrap my brain around some of the thoughts that he shares with me, that he just takes a concept and just takes it so deep and so in another dimension almost. And so this Mexican culture through tacos talked about cultural appreciation versus appropriation. And so we bounced from the podcast to websites that discussed cultural appreciation versus appropriation. And I took the questions off of the screen and printed them out and put them on sentence strips and created some sentence frames so that the students could read the questions, think about the questions, frame their answers. I even had to, because the topic was so deep, to challenge my Vietnamese boy and engage him in the learning. That I had to front load the questions. And so the day before, we listened to the podcast. We talked about the vocabulary. We talked about briefly cultural appreciation versus appropriation. And I introduced the questions for the next day's discussion. And so front loading that material gave them a chance to really think about, because many of the students they were having difficulty explaining what their culture even was. I think so many times culture is such a part of us that we can't identify, we can't isolate it. It's too much of a part of who we are. So they were having a hard time expressing themselves. The biggest space telescope, and the team discovers the planet. The kids loved drawing out the dimensions of the space telescope, as I said, and talking about the planet and where it was in relation to other things in the galaxy. And the Grand Canyon love notes, I really thought that the kids would enjoy the discussion of the love notes, but we really jumped into a discussion and further research into the Grand Canyon and how it was formed and landforms. And so the main topic of the podcast really didn't happen to be the main topic of our lesson. You can go to the next slide. I really appreciate that in creating Listenwise, they really thought of research-based instructional practices and strategies like SIOP. Many of you have mentioned in the chat about building background, about comprehensible input. Excel is a strategy that Margarita Calderon developed to reach our long-term L learners, or ML learners, multilingual learners. And it focuses on vocabulary and syntax and sentence structure and close reading. And so using the transcript, we can do all of those things and integrate Excel into using Listenwise. Brain-based research, finding topics, man, that interest the kids sometimes is so tough. I teach many of them. I'm the only ESL teacher at my high school. So I teach many of them for 4 years. So I can't reuse what I used last year or last spring or anything like that. I have to come up with new and interesting topics for us to discuss and explore. And of course, the Kagan and cooperative learning structures where the kids can talk to one another, the discussion questions, or even the comprehension questions, having them pair up with a partner and talk about those as well. And the WIDA and ELD standards, rich experiences in listening and reading, we know that they lead to stronger skills in writing and speaking. And so that development of vocabulary, that development of sentence structure, of listening to that inflection and that tone in that speaker's voice, all enhance the students' writing and speaking as well. So I really enjoy using it in my classroom.
Thanks so much, Crystal. Kick it over to you, Tatiana.
Thank you. And I'll try to be, thank you so much. Number one, first and foremost, I just want to say that I love public radio. Listening to WNYC in New York City and NPR, which is 93.9 FM in my area, has been an extension of my parenting, first and foremost, because I was a stay-at-home mom full-time before becoming an educator. I have noticed what input means in terms of language acquisition and expected language proficiency, especially my own kids. So when I used to have a car, I don't have a car anymore, I would run errands up and down with my second born, who's almost 18 now, and we'd listen to public radio. So there'd be shows like All Things Considered, The Brian Lear Show, Fresh Air, all of it, the Moth Radio Hour, which I still listen to these today. So when I learned about Listenwise a few years ago, I knew I wanted it for my students, because talk about merging two things, two loves into one platform, teaching and public radio, right? So that was like the selling bit for me. And last year, while I attended a webinar such as this one, I learned that because of Ketchup and a free trial, I thought, hey, maybe I can use this with my second graders. So not so much Ketchup per se, but more like a weird news story called The Ketchup Thief, which is like a 20 or 30-second story on the Listenwise platform about someone who felt guilty about stealing ketchup. So my students, they loved it. Before introducing the podcast, we front-load some vocabulary. We engaged in some pre-lesson discussion about whether or not they ever felt guilty about taking something or doing something wrong. And you'd be surprised how much guilt some second graders carry. You know, taking the extra cookie, cutting in line, poking their sibling on purpose. And then, you know, after we did that discussion, I was able to tailor, using the platform, comprehensions to, you know, align to their proficiency level. And they could hear the story however many times they wanted. They could talk with me about it. They could talk with a peer about it and respond to the questions as best as they could. So it was really, really cool. So recently I attended a PLC meeting with Emily Francis. And if you know her on Twitter, it's at EmilyFranESL, and she's amazing. She had a guest speaker. His name was John Nordmeyer from WIDA, and he spoke about the interdependence of language and content. So yes, shout out to Emily. Language for multilingual learners is learning English, and in our case, as a new language, and content is learning, you know, the ELA, the social studies, the math, and the science. So also in a new language, English. But he emphasized that the importance of treating both together rather than separate is central to our work. So in our work, one depends on the other. And he also said that evening, and this was just last week, that it's also important to shift these 20th century paradigms of working in isolation. And I know some of us may work still in isolation, but we need to start reframing that within ourselves into more of a 21st century paradigm, as he calls it, into working collaboratively. So I don't know about you, but it is difficult to co-plan with teachers in general education. Like especially like Crystal, I also am the only K-5 ESL teacher in my building. How are we going to find time to do this? It's hard, but thanks to John Nordmeyer, I learned that I still can. How? By finding ways to weave it into my context. So for instance, with my ESL group, I know that they're going to learn certain things. So with my 5th graders, they're going to learn about the Civil War, the Industrial Revolution. They're going to have to do a TED Talk this year about a UN sustainability goal. And guess what? Listenwise has ELD lessons that target these themes, and Listenwise can become a source of research for my students. And that's exactly what happened. The TED Talk just happened last week. They did it on zero hunger. There were a couple articles about food, scarcity, food desert, things like that on the Listenwise platform. So even though I can't collaborate or co-teach with general ed teachers directly or in person, I can do so from a distance with Listenwise. So in this way, in my world, I have found opportunities to weave the platform into my sphere of influence in the benefit of my multilingual learners. And my students, we've discovered that they love the platform. And mind you, I've only used it this school year. My previous 2nd graders became 3rd graders. So with my 3rd graders and my 5th graders, I've been able to use it. And I do have a newcomer who arrived just a few months ago from Cuba. And he loves that he can access, he arrived with a very high level of proficiency in his home language. And he loves that he can access the transcripts in Spanish, which is a wonderful equity feature in Listenwise. And, we will print out the transcripts for everybody in English and in Spanish. And depending on the skills that they need to develop, whether it's reading aloud, annotating, taking notes, which are things that they have to learn as they get, older and become, stronger academics. Depending on what skills you're looking to develop, there's just so much you can do with Listenwise. So I'm grateful to have a license this year. I'm hoping I'll have access to funding for next year so I can renew it and continue finding ways of exploiting this to my benefit. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And as Tatiana mentioned, we met each other on a webinar. So my fellow webinar folks that are here, you might be on the next Listenwise webinar, just as a heads up. I just want to say a big thank you so much for Crystal and Tatiana for you both joining and for your insight today. As follow-up, if you are new to Listenwise and you're curious to learn more, we invite you to start a free trial. Those trials are 14 days long. And then if you are curious to get more of your team on board and interested in a district pilot, this would look like maybe all of the ML teachers in your district trying out Listenwise. I'd love to meet with you. Also would love to meet with you if you're just curious even about the free trial. So happy to meet with you all, and we'll be following up with the slides and also that handout with a variety of different resources.